Thank you, Acting Speaker, and I rise to speak on the Consumer and Planning Legislation Amendment, Housing Statement Reform Bill of 2024, an interesting title. And I do so to basically, first of all, outline there are really 8 areas of change in this bill, and 6 of them, I have no problem with. 2 of them I do have an issue with, and that's why I support the reasoned amendment put forward by the Shadow Minister, and that be that all the words after that be omitted and replaced with the words that this bill be withdrawn and redrafted to take into account further consultation with rental providers and industry about unfair impact on removal of the no-fault notices to vacate. Now, some of these changes are reasonable, and those changes are, being able to have transportable bonds, standardising application forms for so renters don't have to just continue to fill out the same form over and over again for different providers of real estate agents. But then there's some other changes which I also see are reasonable, like going from 60 to 90 days to give renters more time to find another rental property because we are in a crisis, and rental bidding, which does seem unreasonable when people are lining up going to rent a property for, say, $500 a week, that they say on the quiet, I'll pay $700, because that's, making it even more difficult for renters to find properties. But I'd say they are problems made by the government's own making. I mean, why are renters having to bid? Why are they taking longer to find other properties when they have to vacate? It's because we're in the middle of a housing crisis. And we're in the middle of a housing crisis because the government have created this problem. And they've created it through 2 avenues. And the first one is the taxes that have been introduced by this government. 58 new and increased taxes in the decade that they have been in, and half of those taxes are actually on property. So when you put taxes on property, you have an outcome that we're seeing play out at the moment, and that is a very negative effect on being able to have enough rental properties available to renters. So we have a crisis of the government's own making. I think what we also are seeing is in this bill the very bold words of a government saying they're producing a housing statement reform. Now, first of all, can I begin by saying this is a government that's been in for 10 years. And last year we saw them come out with the statement they're going to build 80,000 homes a year. Well, what have they been doing for the last 10 years? You wait for a crisis before you address it? Seriously. And what have they done in their first year of addressing the problem? Did they meet the target of 80,000 homes? Absolutely not. They missed that target by a whopping 34%. So instead of building 80,000 homes, they built less than 53,000 homes. 34% miss of the target, absolute fail. And that's what this is. This whole reforms that the government have put in to muck around the edges of the problem, like we're seeing today with these reforms to the residential tenants, to the estate agents' residential tenancy and other acts amendment. This is just more changes over the last 10 years that they have done. There's been a significant amount of changes to that act, and all we've seen is more challenges for people trying to find a rent. It hasn't improved it. If it had improved it, we'd see renters not struggling like they are to find rental properties. But instead, what we've got is a housing crisis and a rental crisis. Now, we're seeing many of these taxes actually making people who want to be rental providers unable to do that. Now, the government keeps saying that rental providers are, massive land barons and they demonise people who want to provide a home for somebody to rent. Well, let's be clear about who these people are. What makes up these people who want to provide a property for somebody to rent? 71% of these people have one other home other than the home they live in that they provide for a family or someone to rent. Many of those, a significant portion of those, are teachers and nurses. These are not people who are, out there to crucify, poor people who they want to see out on the street. And that's one of the reasons why the recent amendments come through as it has, which is to withdraw the change, one of the changes to the Residential Tenancy Act again, which is that after the first term of a contract, you cannot stop someone from, the contract can't, with no fault, be redone. So, sorry, you have to have some reason to give to stop the contract. Now, when you employ someone, it's very similar. You have a probation period, and sometimes it just doesn't work out. And that's the case with this analogy that I'm trying to use to help people understand why, it's not after the second end of the second part of the contract or extension or the third extension of a contract. If it's not working out, it's very reasonable to say, look, let's call it quits. But that's being taken away from the rental providers to be able to utilise. And this is just making people walk away from that sort of investment. These mums and dads who want to provide rental properties to, help people to stay in rental properties, and not everybody can afford to buy. Now, here's an email I'll read out from a constituent who wrote to me and said, "This is why I'm no longer investing in a rental property. It says, not long ago my wife and I received some inheritance money and decided to purchase a unit in Warrnambool with the idea of putting someone in it who couldn't otherwise afford a rental accommodation. A noble idea," he says. "We put a lady into the unit who is a refugee with a young child and set the rent at $220 per week. This mostly worked well, but after a couple of years our tenant's circumstances changed and she now has moved to Portland, so we advertised the unit for rental through a local agent. In addition, our tax bill is now 3 times what it was, and there are new requirements coming for heating, cooling, insulation, and we think further expenses." Now, he goes on, but what his point is, he can't afford to keep that property anymore, and what he did was invest that money that he inherited to help others, and he can't afford to do that anymore. And the stories that I hear coming into my office about people saying, "But I can't afford to pay these taxes, I have to put the rent up, or I can't actually keep the property because I can't meet the mortgage that the property has on it." So people are exiting the market, they are going to Queensland, they are going interstate, and the evidence is clear when we look at the figures of how many bonds are being put forward. It just indicates that there's a massive loss of people who want to provide a rental property for people are not able to do so in Victoria. So the government's own changes of 10 years have totally failed and destroyed the balance that is needed between people who want to provide a rental property and those who are needing to rent. The second reason the government has failed is because they haven't invested in public housing. Now, when you look at this reform, they're supposed to be saying how well they've done with their target of 80,000 homes a year, but in the public housing sector, what we're actually seeing is the $4 billion that this government has supposedly spent on public housing, you'd think would see more houses in the market. But no. What we're really seeing is less 480 houses. That's less. After spending $4 billion, we've got less properties by 488. So from 2015 to 2024, that's the outcome we got from that spend. Yet in New South Wales, we've seen the New South Wales public housing increase to 10,454 houses. The same figure in Victoria is just 4,067. It's an absolute dismal fail. Not only that, most of these properties are smaller single-bedroom units. So we actually have 4,551 fewer bedrooms. So this is a government housing reform that sees 80,000 target a year and fails meeting that target by a whopping 34%. And what it plays out to look like is people who are fleeing family violence are having to wait extraordinary amounts of time, such as nearly 20 months for a home, and they're sleeping in their cars, they're trying to raise their children, they've been promised by this government they'll be looked after because family violence is abhorrent and we should care and protect these women, and that's what happens when they end up on the street, when they finally get the gumption to leave. That's how this government is treating them. And that's what I see in my electorate office frequently, and that's why we're seeing so many more people sleeping on the streets. This government's housing reform is delusional. It is nothing about reform. They've had 10 years in government. The time for excuses is over. They have failed dismally, and the people of South West Coast are certainly feeling and suffering the consequences of a government that hasn't invested in public housing, has taxed people to the hilt, has sent rental providers fleeing to other states and leaving people needing a rent on the street.